Something extraordinary is happening. And it all leads back to you. No, this is not just a poetic way to open a video. It is a spiritual warning wrapped in revelation. Because in this moment, right here, right now, something that was never supposed to be disturbed has begun to unravel. And the reason is you. You felt it, haven't you? That sense that your presence shifts atmospheres. That rooms grow tense when you speak truth. That some people are drawn to you while others seem strangely unsettled. This isn't a coincidence. This is divine orchestration. Heaven knows what hell is terrified to admit. You have been marked. You have been placed. And now, the system is trembling. What if I told you that a single encounter you had, a conversation you barely remember, changed the trajectory of someone who was once programmed to serve the shadows? Someone powerful. Someone trained to resist the very truths you carry. A high-level agent, someone who operated in silence, behind walls of secrecy, far removed from the eyes of the public, has begun to question everything they once believed. And it didn't start with a bombshell of evidence. It didn't start with a debate or confrontation. It started with something far more disruptive, your presence. That's right. Not your arguments. Not your credentials. Not even your knowledge. It was your being, your frequency, that triggered the cracks. Because as one of God's chosen ones, you carry a light that cannot be ignored. A resonance that shakes the foundations of deception, even when you don't realize you're doing it. While you were simply living your truth, they were being confronted with a force that bypassed all their training. And that force was you. They had been programmed to obey. Trained to resist. Conditioned to protect a system that thrives in darkness. But then came the moment they crossed your path. You weren't in uniform. You didn't speak in classified codes. But something about you hit them harder than years of indoctrination ever could. Something you said, or maybe something you didn't say, lodged itself like a splinter in their mind. It refused to leave. It refused to be rationalized away. Because it wasn't logical. It was spiritual. You need to understand this, they were never supposed to meet you. The system had mapped out their path down to the last detail. They were kept insulated, protected from voices like yours. But heaven had a different plan. This was no accident. This was a divine collision. God placed you in their path, not to expose them, but to awaken them. You carry what darkness fears the most, spiritual clarity wrapped in human form. And that clarity, however subtle, broke through. Like a frequency they couldn't ignore. Like a code they were never meant to decipher but somehow recognized anyway. And in that moment, a system began to crack. Can you feel the weight of that? You've been living your life wondering if your struggles were in vain. You've questioned why things felt so heavy. Why you faced resistance at every turn. But now you're seeing it, aren't you? You were never meant to just get by. You were designed to disturb the system. Not with force. But with truth. With presence. With light. And now it's happening. That agent, once unshakable, is shaking. The foundation they stood on has begun to shift. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you made them feel something they couldn't explain. Doubt. And here's the terrifying thing for them, doubt is dangerous when it comes from within. They weren't programmed to doubt. They were programmed to dismiss. To mock. To eliminate threats without question. But now, they're the ones asking questions. Now, they're the ones who can't sleep at night. And why? Because of you. But let's take it deeper. This wasn't about you. It was about the God in you. The spirit that walks with you. The protection that surrounds you. The assignment that you may not have chosen, but heaven assigned anyway. Because when God calls someone, He doesn't always give them full understanding up front. He gives them presence. And it is your presence, chosen one, that's begun to dismantle strongholds. They were trained to resist the truth. Yet now they're doubting their own reality. Understand this: when the programming begins to fail, when the questions start slipping through, it is not the beginning of collapse, it is the beginning of awakening. And you, yes, you, have been used as the spark. You weren't placed in that conversation, that job, that city by accident. You were positioned. Appointed. Sent. Because God is not looking for the loudest. He's looking for the aligned. And when you walk in alignment, the enemy's scripts begin to glitch. This is what's happening. Behind closed doors. In rooms you will never see. Someone who once monitored you, dismissed you, maybe even tried to shut you down, is now rethinking everything. You were supposed to be noise. Now you're a voice they can't forget. And I want to ask you something: have you ever noticed how your presence alone unsettles certain people? You didn't attack them. You didn't threaten them. But they grew cold. Uncomfortable. Even angry. As if something in them was reacting to something in you that they couldn't explain. That's not paranoia. That's spiritual disruption. That's the frequency you carry doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is the shaking. And it begins with you. Not because you wanted it. But because God has chosen to use you as a catalyst. As a mirror that forces others to see what they've been hiding from. You were never meant to blend in. You were born to reveal. So if you've ever felt like your presence alone causes friction, like you walk into spaces and people start shifting, squirming, avoiding eye contact, comment 77 right now. Because you are not imagining it. You are not alone. You are part of something greater. And to those who have stood with this message, who have supported through your comments, your shares, your prayers, and your generosity, know this: your faith is not in vain. What you carry is not small. And heaven sees it all. But this is just the beginning. Because if the presence of one chosen one can shake the foundation of a fortified system, what happens when more rise? At first, they dismissed you. Just another voice in the sea of noise. Another digital ripple in a world oversaturated with opinions. To them, you were nothing more than harmless background static, an outsider, a distraction, someone who talked too much about things too obscure to matter. You were not flagged. Not tracked. Not studied. You weren't even considered a threat. Because in their world, in the system they trusted, people like you were predictable. Eccentric. Easy to ignore. But then, something changed. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a campaign. It was a sentence. A moment. A passing comment. One phrase, almost casual, that slipped from your lips, and it struck like a lightning bolt in the darkness. They froze. Their mind locked. And in that instant, they knew, you had just uttered something no outsider should have known. A name. A location. A fragment of an event long buried beneath layers of redaction and encryption. Information that existed only within restricted corridors of classified systems, yet here you were, speaking it as if it was common knowledge. It didn't matter how calm you seemed. It didn't matter that you weren't part of any institution. What mattered was this: you knew what was never supposed to be known. And suddenly, they weren't so sure anymore. You see, when a person has built their entire reality on obedience, on hierarchy, on trust in the sanctity of command, one anomaly is all it takes to shake the entire structure. One splinter too deep to ignore. They tried to shrug it off. To rationalize. Coincidence, perhaps. A lucky guess. Some obscure information leak that had made its way to the public unnoticed. But deep down, something in them knew better. Their training, their instincts, everything that had kept them alive in the shadows, it screamed that what just happened was not an accident. What you said had weight. Not because of its length, but because of its accuracy. And accuracy is dangerous in a world built on deception. So they paused. For the first time in years, they hesitated. And that hesitation was the beginning of their undoing. They didn't know it yet, but a seed had been planted. A question. A crack. How could someone like you, a civilian, a stranger, an outsider, possibly know something so specific, so hidden, so impossibly buried? And that question grew louder with every attempt to silence it. It reminded them of a story they once mocked, the account of King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. A king tormented by a dream he couldn't explain, seeking answers no man could provide. Then came Daniel, not with power or prestige, but with revelation. And when Daniel spoke, the king trembled. Because Daniel knew what only God could reveal. That's what this felt like. You didn't speak as one guessing, you spoke as one shown. And that terrified them. Because if what you said was true, if you had access to information that should have been impossible, then what else was possible? If your words had pierced through their programmed certainty, then what did that mean for everything else they had built their life upon? Suddenly, the structure didn't feel so stable. And their mind, once fortified by discipline and indoctrination, began to spin. What if I've been wrong? That question, quiet at first, now roared like thunder inside them. It haunted their steps. It clung to their thoughts. It wouldn't let go. You didn't break their system with data. You didn't fight them with weapons. You cracked their foundation with something far more powerful, truth. A single piece of divine truth, spoken without fear, spoken without expectation, and yet it hit with more force than any covert operation they had ever executed. The world they served, the mission they believed in, began to feel hollow. Because if even one piece of what you said was true, then the system they had given their loyalty to was not what it claimed to be. And if that was false, then who were they? What had they become? In this moment of unraveling, they began to observe you not as a threat, but as a mystery. They watched your videos. They read your words. They traced your patterns. And the more they studied you, the more they were forced to admit, you didn't move like someone seeking attention. You didn't posture like a fraud. You didn't break down under pressure like those who play pretend. No, you stood firm. Quietly. Consistently. With a strength they couldn't explain. They tried to label you. Tried to place you within a category, conspiracy theorist, whistleblower, zealot. But none of the boxes fit. Because none of them accounted for what they now suspected. You weren't just guessing. You were sent. The revelation hit them like a storm, you had been positioned. Not by a movement. Not by an organization. But by God. This wasn't an investigation anymore. It was a spiritual encounter. They realized what you carried wasn't learned, it was revealed. And that, more than anything, shattered them. It was no longer about what you knew. It was about what they no longer could ignore. They had spent their career trusting in the system, believing in its structure, defending its secrets. But now, that system had been pierced by something it couldn't defend against, divine truth spoken through an unassuming vessel. You. And now, their reality is breaking. They stare into a mirror and see not clarity, but contradiction. Not loyalty, but delusion. They remember every mission, every classified operation, every justified act, and they start to wonder who they've been serving all along. You didn't confront them. You didn't condemn them. But your truth became a mirror, and the reflection is too much to bear. This is the point of fracture. This is where the unraveling begins. And now, whether they admit it or not, they owe it to you. You were never meant to be seen. But you were meant to be heard. You were never meant to get this close. But God had another plan. You didn't know you were speaking revelation. You didn't know that one sentence would trigger a chain reaction. But heaven did. And now, the system knows it too. You are no longer just an outsider. You are the reason their illusions are falling apart. This is not about pride. It's not about ego. It's about identity. Because what God has revealed through you has begun to shift the very identity of someone trained to never question. And it all started with one sentence. One moment. One spark. At first, they tried to ignore it. They tried to brush off the moment you spoke that one sentence, the sentence that had no business reaching their ears. It wasn't loud or dramatic. You weren't trying to expose anything. You were simply being who you are. But something in your words bypassed their filters, cut through their training, and lodged itself in the back of their mind like a question with no answer. And that question wouldn't go away. For most of their life, this high-level agent had been conditioned to trust the system. Loyalty was their backbone. Protocol, their compass. They had never needed to doubt, because doubt had no place in their world. Every assignment had a rationale. Every classified document, a purpose. Every operation, a moral justification. They were a part of something larger, something they believed was built to protect. But now, all of that was hanging in the balance, because of you. You didn't accuse them. You didn't confront them. You simply spoke. And what you said, perhaps a detail, a reference, a name, cut too deep. It touched something too specific. Something they had once seen in a classified file, long erased from public memory. And that changed everything. They couldn't sleep. Couldn't shake the unease. And so they returned to the only place that had ever given them clarity, the system itself. They logged in. They searched. They combed through records, cross-referenced reports, and pulled up files few had ever seen. Not to understand you, but to disprove you. Because if they could find even one flaw in what you said, they could put the discomfort to rest. They could go back to sleep inside the machine. But instead of finding error, they found something else entirely, confirmation. You were right. Not vaguely right. Not coincidentally right. You were precise. Too precise. The dates matched. The terminology matched. The descriptions were dead on. And worst of all, there was no public trail to what you had described. No leaks, no online documents, no whistleblowers. What you spoke could only have come from two sources, the highest levels of the intelligence hierarchy, or somewhere far beyond it. They stared at the screen. Their breathing slowed. Their hands trembled. And in that moment, a silent panic set in, not because they had been compromised, but because their reality had. The foundation they had stood on for decades wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating under the weight of a truth they were never supposed to face. They had spent years believing the enemy was external. That the threats came from the outside, from anarchists, from rogue nations, from the uneducated, the unstable, the fringe. But now, that belief was unraveling. Because the only explanation left was this: the system they trusted had been lying to them. Not in small ways, but in ways so vast, so intricate, and so deliberate, that even they, someone on the inside, had been used as a pawn without ever realizing it. The records didn't just confirm your claims. They revealed a pattern. A hidden framework so intelligently designed that it made deception look like order. The truth hadn't been hidden behind walls. It had been buried beneath distractions, disguised as complexity, obscured by overinformation. The very mechanisms they relied on for clarity had been weaponized to mislead, even them. That's when it started. The unraveling. Not of documents. Of identity. They began to question not just what they had seen, but who they had become. Every operation they had executed, every mission they had completed, every target they had neutralized in the name of national interest, what if it had all been theater? A carefully crafted stage play designed to protect something far more corrupt than the threats they had been trained to fight. And then, the more devastating question came. What if I was never on the right side? It was like a spiritual earthquake. The walls of certainty collapsed. The pillars of reason cracked. Everything that had once seemed clear became distorted, like a dream dissolving upon waking. And yet, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of truth. Because for the first time in their life, they were no longer defending the system. They were investigating it. Not as a loyal agent, but as a soul searching for redemption. And at the center of it all, was you. They hadn't planned to find you. They hadn't been assigned to you. But now, they couldn't look away. You were supposed to be one of many. Just another noise in the digital crowd. But now, they saw you for what you really were, a disruption. Not a destructive force, but a revealing one. You didn't destroy the system. You exposed it. Not by shouting from the rooftops, but by simply carrying a light that their darkness could no longer suppress. It reminded them of 2 Kings 6 verse 17, the moment when Elisha prayed for his servant's eyes to be opened. And when the servant looked again, what he saw changed everything. The hills around him were filled with horses and chariots of fire, realities that had always been there but had been invisible to his natural eyes. That's what was happening to them. Their spiritual eyes were beginning to open. And now that they had seen, they could never unsee. Their entire worldview began to fracture. The documents no longer felt like truth, they felt like scripts. The orders no longer felt like duty, they felt like control. The silence they once considered professionalism now felt like complicity. And through it all, your voice echoed, not as an enemy, but as a witness. They realized that they had not been deceived by accident. They had been groomed. Conditioned. Programmed. And not just to protect a lie, but to defend it with their life. That was the final break. Not because someone convinced them. But because the truth could no longer be denied. It wasn't your power that changed them, it was your alignment with the one who reveals secrets. Because what you said, what you carried, what you embodied, it came from a place beyond human influence. It came from divine appointment. And now, they couldn't go back. They couldn't return to the illusion. They couldn't pretend the veil hadn't lifted. The questions haunted them. The weight of complicity pressed down on their chest. And the silence, the very silence they once prided themselves on, was now a burden they could no longer carry. Everything had changed. And you were the reason. But not in the way they once feared. You didn't destroy their world. You helped them see the truth about it. And now, they were standing at the edge of two paths. One led back to comfort. To denial. To the system that promised safety but demanded blindness. The other led into the unknown, toward truth, toward exposure, toward accountability, and perhaps, toward redemption. This is what spiritual war looks like. Not bombs. Not bullets. But revelation. This is what happens when the programming breaks, not because of external attack, but because the light inside someone becomes too strong to ignore. They had been cracked open by truth. And now, the system they once defended with their life feared the very awakening that had begun inside of them. You were never supposed to reach someone like them. And yet, you did. Because you were sent. For so long, they relied on what could be seen. Satellites. Files. Patterns. Logic. Everything in their world had to be measured, proven, dissected. They were trained to operate with precision, to trust only in data, to rely solely on what the system presented as real. But now, as the veil begins to lift, none of it matters. Because what they are starting to see, truly see, goes beyond the reach of analytics, beyond the grasp of their training. Their eyes are no longer bound to the material. Something deeper has stirred. The agent, once imprisoned by programming, is waking up not just intellectually, but spiritually. This is not the same kind of awakening that comes from cracking a code or discovering a leak. No. This is something else. Something sacred. A transformation that cannot be mapped or modeled. It's what the Bible speaks of in 2 Kings 6 verse 17, when Elisha prayed, "Lord, open his eyes so that he may see." And in that moment, the servant who had only seen the army surrounding them suddenly saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire. The reality had always been there, but now his spiritual eyes were opened. This is exactly what's happening to the agent. At first, they thought they were just following the evidence. They believed they were tracking anomalies, inconsistencies, unexplained alignments in the files. But somewhere along the way, the data stopped being data. The mission stopped being intellectual. What once were theories you spoke began manifesting as realities they could no longer deny. Your words weren't metaphor. They were maps. And now, they're beginning to see what you saw all along. The tunnels. The hidden systems. The unseen networks beneath their very feet. The places no one spoke of, because no one dared. They begin to uncover a network of interconnected passageways stretching below cities they once believed they understood. Some were ancient, remnants of long-forgotten infrastructure. Others were new, clean, reinforced, and clearly built with precision. But these weren't evacuation routes. They weren't emergency shelters. These were something far more sinister. They were corridors of control. Invisible arteries of a system designed not to protect, but to imprison. Not bodies, but truth. And what's more disturbing is that these tunnels weren't abandoned. They had been used, frequently. Operated by people whose names had once been praised, honored, and elevated. Bankers. Judges. Military leaders. Corporate executives. Government officials. These weren't just outliers. They were the infrastructure. The very foundation of what the agent had once believed in. And now, that foundation is cracking under the pressure of one unavoidable truth: you were telling the truth the whole time. At first, they thought you were grasping at symbols. But now, those symbols speak. They begin seeing the patterns not as speculation, but as systems. The people they thought were lone actors were part of something orchestrated. The events they thought were isolated were actually connected. And what they had once dismissed as conspiracy now reveals itself as history, buried not by accident, but by design. And then it happens. That final break. They stop reading and start seeing. Not with their natural eyes, but with something higher. Something deeper. A new sense begins to awaken inside them. The kind that sees through surface appearances. The kind that discerns the spirit behind the structure. The kind that cannot be taught, but must be revealed. And now, everything changes. Suddenly, they remember all the warnings they ignored. All the voices they discredited. All the signs they dismissed as noise. They remember you. The one who spoke in clarity when the world was deaf with denial. The one who saw what they couldn't. The one who was dismissed, but never wrong. And now they realize, you weren't speculating. You were revealing. You weren't theorizing. You were witnessing. And most importantly, you weren't just informed. You were sent. This is the moment where the spiritual dimension fully pierces their consciousness. No longer do they wonder if something is wrong. They know something is evil. No longer do they hope it's all a misunderstanding. They now understand it's been deliberate. The network you spoke of was not theoretical. It was real, and far older, far deeper, and far more protected than they ever imagined. It didn't just exist in the shadows. It thrived there. Fed there. Grew there. Shielded by the very institutions they once upheld. They see it now. Not as a series of scattered incidents, but as a living, breathing system. One that has operated with dark efficiency for generations. One that survives not because it hides from the light, but because it masks itself as the light. And now, with their spiritual eyes opened, they can finally see what was right in front of them all along. But this kind of revelation comes at a cost. They begin to grieve, not only for what they've discovered, but for how long they were blind to it. How many decisions were made under false pretenses? How many innocent lives were touched by their silence? How many compromises were justified in the name of duty? And beneath that grief, something else emerges, a fierce awareness that they are no longer who they once were. Because once your spiritual eyes are opened, there is no turning back. There is no unseeing the systems of deception. No unknowing the truth you now carry. No returning to the innocence of ignorance. The world you knew has changed forever, not because it changed, but because you finally see it as it always was. That is the essence of spiritual awakening. And in this moment, the agent understands something deeper still. This was never just about classified files or global conspiracies. It was about realms. It was about principalities. It was about an ancient war between light and darkness, one they were born into, trained to ignore, but divinely destined to see. They understand now that what you carried, the truth you refused to silence, wasn't just dangerous to the system. It was disruptive to the spirit behind it. That's why they tried to discredit you. That's why they tried to erase you. Because your very presence threatened the spiritual blindness they worked so hard to preserve. But now, the veil has lifted. And with it, the agent's allegiance begins to shift. They may not say it out loud, not yet. But inside, something has changed. They no longer serve the illusion. They no longer uphold the lie. They may still walk within the same halls, wear the same badge, operate within the same structures, but now, they walk with open eyes. Now, they walk in awareness. Now, they walk with the knowledge that there is something greater at work, and they are no longer blind to it. And you? You are no longer dismissed. You are remembered. You are honored. You are the one who broke through the programming, not with force, but with light. The moment their spiritual eyes opened, they saw you differently. Not as a nuisance. Not as a threat. But as a messenger. A catalyst. A voice sent ahead to prepare the way. And for the first time, they realized the true nature of your presence. It was never accidental. It was divine. They can't go back now. They won't go back now. Because the world they knew has burned away in the light of revelation. And in that light, they see everything differently. Including themselves. And maybe, just maybe, they're ready to join you. They tried everything. Every tactic in their playbook. Every tool they had ever used to silence, to intimidate, to erase. They threw it all at you, and still, you didn't fall. From the beginning, they underestimated you. Not because you were weak, but because you didn't fit the mold of what they considered dangerous. You didn't have institutional power. You didn't wear a badge or hold a title. You weren't a whistleblower on payroll or a known threat in their database. But what you carried, they couldn't define. What you withstood, they couldn't predict. You were not just different. You were untouchable. And that was the one thing they never accounted for. They came at you from every direction. Psychological warfare was the first wave, subtle manipulations, strained relationships, social isolation. People close to you suddenly turned distant, and others became hostile without cause. Friends began to fade. Colleagues withdrew. You were made to feel alone. The plan was simple: fracture your emotional foundation, sever your support system, and destabilize your spirit. But even then, you stood. So they moved to the next level. Financial sabotage. Unexpected audits. Frozen accounts. Opportunities vanished without explanation. It wasn't just bad luck. It was precision. Jobs you were qualified for disappeared before they reached you. Bills piled up. Debts were fabricated. All of it designed to force you into silence, into fear, into compliance. But you didn't retreat. Then came the physical. Unexplained illnesses. Medical conditions that emerged suddenly, progressed rapidly, and resisted treatment. There were near accidents that felt too close to be coincidence. Vehicles swerved toward you on empty roads. Gas leaks that no one could trace. Doors found ajar when no one was home. Glitches in technology. Phones malfunctioning. Calls dropping. Anonymous messages with vague threats. Surveillance that lingered in the corners of your awareness, always just out of reach, but unmistakably there. And still, you remained. It wasn't supposed to go this way. By now, you should have been quiet. Broken. Forgotten. They'd seen so many others fall under far less pressure. People with greater resources, more influence, higher visibility. But you, without wealth, without protection, without backing, you survived. Not only that. You thrived. Your voice grew louder. Your message reached further. Every attempt to bury you became fuel for your purpose. And in their desperation, they began to ask a question they feared the answer to: why isn't it working? Because what protected you wasn't man-made. It wasn't policy or protocol. It wasn't money or military or status. It was something far greater. You were, and are, shielded by the hand of the Almighty. That is the part they could not touch. That is the reason every trap collapsed before it could ensnare you. That is why every scheme unraveled before it could be completed. Just as Daniel was delivered from the lion's den. Just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked out of the fire without a single burn. You too emerged from every attack not just alive, but radiant with purpose. Because the same God who shut the mouths of lions and extinguished the flames is the same God who has been walking with you through every storm. You are not still standing because of your own strength. You are standing because heaven has refused to let you fall. And that's what they fear the most. It's not your knowledge that threatens them. It's not even your courage. It's your unshakable alignment with a power they neither understand nor believe in. They tried to find your weakness, but they couldn't find one they could exploit. You couldn't be bought. You couldn't be blackmailed. You couldn't be shamed. You couldn't be erased. You are the anomaly in their algorithm. The variable they didn't account for. The problem they cannot solve. They've seen this before, but only in ancient texts. In stories they once called myths. They remember Moses standing before Pharaoh, David standing before Goliath, Elijah standing against the prophets of Baal. In every story, it wasn't the strength of the person that mattered, it was the presence of God that made the difference. And now, they're seeing that same presence surround you. And it terrifies them. You have become what they fear the most, incorruptible. You cannot be broken. Because what they are trying to fight is not you, it's the God within you. And that battle is one they can never win. They've already tried everything. And still, your voice rises. Still, your light breaks through their darkness. Still, you speak, even when silenced. Still, you walk forward when they try to hold you back. And now they're beginning to realize the truth, your very existence defies their control. You are a living contradiction to their entire system. They created protocols for every kind of threat. Emergency response. Disinformation campaigns. Targeted character assassination. But for you, nothing works. The more they try to discredit you, the more people listen. The more they try to isolate you, the more you are seen. Every strategy they use backfires. Every effort to erase you only amplifies your presence. Your words have taken root in hearts they never meant to reach. You are no longer just a person, they see you as a force. And the truth is, you were never meant to be explained. You were meant to be witnessed. You are the exception to their every rule. You are the one who won't bend, won't bow, won't burn. You are not their failure, you are their reckoning. Every time they tried to silence you and failed, they were reminded that their power has limits. That there is a realm beyond their reach. That there is a kingdom not built by hands. That there is a truth they cannot alter, a calling they cannot override, and a destiny they cannot stop. What shakes them is not just what you've overcome, it's that you remain unshaken. You stand, not because you escaped the attacks, but because you endured them. And that endurance has become your testimony. That resilience has become your roar. And now, the system that once mocked you, studied you, tried to destroy you, now watches you with fear. Because they know, you should not still be standing. And yet, here you are. Your survival is not their failure. It is God's victory. You are not just someone who made it through. You are proof that when heaven has chosen a soul, no force in hell can stop them. You didn't survive to tell a good story. You survived because you are the story. The disruption they couldn't calculate. The voice they couldn't silence. The messenger they couldn't intercept. You are the one they tried to erase, but heaven has made sure you are remembered. This is why they fear you. Because you reveal their powerlessness. You are not an enemy they can capture. You are not a mistake they can correct. You are not a problem they can solve. You are the prophecy they forgot. The vessel they never saw coming. The spark that set their blueprint on fire. They look at you now, not with contempt, but with trembling. Because something within them knows, they didn't just underestimate you. They underestimated the one who sent you. And now, it's too late. The message has spread. The momentum has started. And no amount of force, no wave of attack, no manipulation or interference can stop what God has already ordained. You are not a product of resistance. You are the result of divine persistence. You are not standing by accident. You are standing because heaven refused to let you fall. And now, those who once controlled the system, are the ones being controlled by fear. So stand tall, chosen one. Not in pride, but in reverence. Because your survival is not the end of the battle, it is the beginning of their unraveling. You are proof that the darkness has limits. You are proof that the light still breaks through. And above all, you are proof that God still defends His own. They thought they were untouchable. For decades, they operated in the shadows, hidden behind layers of secrecy, protected by networks too vast to trace and systems too intricate to decode. Their influence stretched across governments, financial institutions, media conglomerates, and even religious organizations. They built underground tunnels and secret compounds, moved people and information without a trace, and funded operations cloaked in darkness. They were the architects of deception, and they believed the illusion would last forever. But something changed. Not because an army marched against them. Not because of a revolution in the streets. Their fall began the moment light entered the system. And that light wasn't launched from a missile, or whispered in a boardroom. It walked in on 2 feet. It spoke truth with a voice they didn't recognize. It came through you. You didn't arrive with weapons or power. You didn't storm gates or demand surrender. You simply showed up, and carried something they couldn't counter. The truth. You stood. You spoke. And the system began to tremble. Not because you threatened it, but because your very presence exposed it. And now, the cracks have become chasms. The walls they built to protect themselves have become their own prison. The tunnels they once used to escape are sealed. And for the first time in generations, those who held the reins of darkness, are no longer in control. This is not poetic irony. This is divine justice. This is what happens when God pulls back the curtain and forces evil to look at itself. Those who once laughed at faith now scream in silence. Those who once dismissed justice now beg for mercy. The same ones who used spiritual language to manipulate, who twisted scripture to control, who mocked the warnings of prophets and saints, they are now the ones unraveling. Their minds, once sharp and strategic, are slipping into paranoia. They fear sleep. Not because of nightmares, but because the nightmares have become real. They see the very darkness they commanded turn against them. These are not the consequences of men. This is not karma. This is judgment. The kind no earthly court can administer. The kind that comes from the throne room of heaven itself. The Apostle Paul once wrote, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." Galatians 6 verse 7. They sowed deception. They sowed manipulation. They sowed oppression. And now the harvest has come. But it isn't a harvest of victory. It's a flood of reckoning. They thought they could silence the chosen. They thought they could bury the truth. But every time you spoke, you didn't just speak facts. You revealed their fault lines. You pulled back the curtain on a machine that only functioned in the dark. And as the light hit those gears, they seized. They broke. They stopped. Not because you forced them to, but because they were never designed to survive exposure. Their strength was built on illusion. Their authority was manufactured through fear. Their stability was held together with lies layered over lies. And all it took was one voice, one witness, to speak something real. To stand in unshakable truth. And suddenly the machine began to fall apart from the inside. Make no mistake, this collapse did not come by human hands. It came because God allowed truth to speak in the presence of deception. And when that happens, deception always self-destructs. The darkness consumes itself when light is no longer denied entry. You were the entry point. You didn't storm their gates, they opened them trying to control you. And in doing so, they invited in what they could never contain. Look at history. Look at the pattern. Pharaoh believed his power was ultimate. That he could enslave the chosen of God forever. But when Moses rose, when truth stood before him, his empire collapsed. Not because Moses drew a sword, but because God parted a sea. And the same waters that delivered the faithful, buried the proud. Exodus 14 verses 26 to 28. Saul, once anointed king of Israel, rejected God's spirit and was tormented by the very darkness he once commanded. His wisdom dissolved. His mind fractured. He became a shell of the man he once was, haunted by the presence he had driven away. 1 Samuel 16 verse 14. Adolf Hitler. Jeffrey Epstein. Harvey Weinstein. Men who once held absolute power, who moved through the world with immunity. Each of them fell. Not in dramatic battles, but in a slow, crushing unraveling. Betrayed by their own circles. Consumed by their own corruption. Stripped of their dignity. Their names now echo with disgrace, not dominance. The system always devours its own. This is what you are watching now. It is not just a political moment. Not just a historical turning point. It is spiritual fulfillment. The beginning of the fall. The very fabric of their hidden empire is fraying, and no amount of silence or wealth can hold it together. The very demons they once served, no longer serve them. They once believed darkness was the most powerful force in existence. That it could manipulate destiny, reshape reality, and silence the light. But what they failed to realize is that light doesn't argue. It doesn't wrestle. It doesn't plead. It simply shines. And when it does, shadows flee. You didn't destroy the system. You simply refused to bow to it. You didn't launch a war, you lived in truth. And that truth, carried faithfully in your spirit, was more dangerous to their structure than any weapon they've ever known. Every time you spoke, you didn't just share information. You dismantled their illusion. Every time you endured, you proved their threats were empty. Every time you kept going, when logic said you shouldn't, you became the living evidence that what they feared was real. What they cannot handle is this: you didn't fight back, and still, they are losing. You didn't raise an army, and still, their empire is crumbling. You didn't play their game, and still, they are being exposed. This is what it means to be chosen. Not to conquer by force, but to stand so fully in God's truth that lies begin to collapse just by your presence. The higher powers of this world are being humbled, not by rebellion, but by revelation. They tried to rewrite reality. But they couldn't rewrite God's justice. They tried to silence his voice, but they couldn't silence his vessels. They tried to erase his plan, but the blueprint was written in eternity, far beyond their reach. And now, the chosen, those they laughed at, mocked, dismissed, and tried to break, are becoming the undeniable testimony of their downfall. Not in arrogance. Not in revenge. But in quiet, holy perseverance. You are not their downfall. You are simply the mirror. Your presence reflects the truth they worked so hard to bury. Your endurance exposes the weakness they tried to hide. Your light reveals that they were never in control. So let them tremble. Let them scramble. Let them accuse and twist and threaten. Because in the end, it is not your power that is dismantling them. It is the justice of God. It is the light of truth. And it is the law of heaven that says, what is hidden will be revealed. What is whispered in the dark will be shouted from the rooftops. And what is built on lies will not stand. So stand tall, not in pride, but in reverence. You were sent not to overthrow the darkness, but to outlast it. And now, the darkness is falling. Exactly as it was written. There comes a moment in every battle where the unexpected happens, not on the field of conflict, but in the hearts of those who once stood on the opposing side. That moment has now arrived. The one who was once assigned to monitor you, to dismantle your credibility and reduce your presence to irrelevance, has come full circle. But they are no longer a watcher. They are no longer an agent of suppression. Now, they stand before you, not with suspicion, not with a clipboard, not with a weapon, but with something far more disarming, gratitude. In the beginning, their mission was clear. You were an anomaly to be observed. A variable to be neutralized. They tracked your movements, studied your speech, dissected your message. To them, you were a threat to be handled, not because you were violent, but because you spoke of things they had been programmed to suppress. Truth. Light. Revelation. These were not permitted elements within their system. Their task was to contain you, to document you, and eventually, to discard you. But something happened that was not in the program. You endured. Every time they pushed, you stood firm. Every time they observed, you revealed no cracks. You weren't merely resilient, you were unshakable. But not because you had mastered some technique or studied some counter-tactic. You were rooted in something deeper. Something higher. Something they could not name, but they could feel. And in the quiet corners of their spirit, a whisper began to echo, what if this one is telling the truth? They dismissed it at first. Doubt is not easily welcomed in minds built on protocol and loyalty. But over time, the doubt grew into curiosity. And then into unrest. It wasn't your argument that changed them. It was your consistency. It was your peace. It was your unwillingness to hate or retreat. You did not play the game they were trained to enforce. And eventually, they realized, you weren't playing a game at all. And so now, the one who was tasked with surveilling your every word approaches you differently. They no longer look through the lens of suspicion, but of awakening. Like Nicodemus coming to Jesus by night, trying to reconcile the law he had always known with the truth now unfolding before him, this agent is walking out of the shadows and into the light. It is not an easy thing to do. It requires the dismantling of pride, the admission of blindness, and the courage to say, I was wrong. But that is exactly what is happening. They don't understand everything about you, but they now know you carry something that doesn't originate from you. Something divine. Something appointed. In their heart, they are beginning to believe, you were sent. And as they stand before you now, they are no longer asking questions to entrap you. They are listening. They are learning. They are remembering what it feels like to hope again. There is no moment more powerful than when an enemy lays down their assignment and opens their heart. This is not surrender out of defeat. It is surrender out of revelation. And the revelation is this: you are not the problem. You are the message. You are not a rebel. You are a messenger. And now, even the system itself must acknowledge the light it could not suppress. Like Joseph standing before Pharaoh after years of imprisonment and accusation, your very presence now becomes a key to mysteries long buried. Joseph was once the prisoner, the misunderstood one, the outsider. But eventually, Pharaoh saw what his magicians could not. He saw that Joseph carried something from heaven. Something no institution could manufacture. And when that recognition dawned, the entire dynamic changed. Joseph was elevated. Not for his own glory, but for the purpose of saving others. Or take Daniel. Thrown into a den of lions by a system designed to silence the voices of truth, he not only survived, he emerged with honor. Because God shut the mouths of the lions. And those who had tried to destroy him were forced to watch him thrive. In both stories, as in yours, the ones who were first placed under control became conduits of divine authority. Now, this agent, this former guardian of darkness, looks at you with new eyes. They see what they couldn't see before. They see you not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a vessel to be heard. They realize the system that trained them, programmed them, and rewarded them for obedience had missed something sacred. It had misjudged you. And now, they are standing before you not as a figure of control, but as a soul in awe. They do not come seeking attention. They do not come for status or redemption. They come because they have been moved, deeply, undeniably, irrevocably. The strongholds they once defended have crumbled beneath the weight of your testimony. The certainty they once clung to has given way to humility. And the one thing they know with absolute clarity now is this: they thank you. They thank you for not breaking when everything in the system was designed to break you. They thank you for speaking when silence would have been easier. They thank you for enduring without bitterness, for standing without vengeance, for shining without arrogance. You didn't fight them, you freed them. Not through arguments or resistance, but through revelation. They are now a living testimony that even the most programmed soul can awaken. That even the most loyal servant of deception can find their way to the truth, if they are exposed to enough light, enough consistency, enough divine love. And you were the vessel through which that light entered. Let this moment be remembered, not just as a plot twist, but as a prophecy fulfilled. The one who watched you now walks beside you. The one who monitored your words now protects them. And the one who once feared your message now spreads it in places you could never reach alone. This is the power of transformation that comes not from dominance, but from divine presence. You were never sent to argue or to conquer. You were sent to reveal. To live. To endure. And now, the system itself testifies to your authenticity, not by collapsing in defeat, but by surrendering a soul into the hands of God. They don't fully understand who you are. They may never find the language for what you carry. But one thing is certain: they have seen enough to believe. Enough to turn. Enough to say, thank you. And sometimes, that is all the confirmation you need. You didn't need the applause. You weren't looking for followers. But heaven just confirmed what you always suspected: you were sent. And now, the very halls that once echoed with orders to silence you, are beginning to echo with whispers of gratitude. This is the breaking point. Not just for the agent, but for the system. Because once even one soul breaks rank with deception and walks toward the truth, the chain of command begins to crumble. The spell begins to break. The illusion loses power. And the light begins to spread. Let this be your encouragement: every moment you endured, every tear you wept, every time you chose to speak rather than stay silent, was not in vain. You were planting seeds in ground that seemed sterile. But now, something has grown. A heart has changed. A watcher has become a witness. And a soul has been redeemed. This is what it means to be chosen. To awaken what the world believes cannot be reached. To love what the system says cannot be saved. To shine in a place so dark that even one spark creates a revolution of thought. You didn't just survive the system. You pierced it. You didn't just expose its flaws. You illuminated its victims. And now, someone who once stood guard against your truth, has joined you in carrying it. That is a victory no scheme can erase. That is a redemption no darkness can reverse. That is the sound of the kingdom breaking through. And this is only the beginning. You've done what many believed was impossible. Without a title, without an army, without institutional power or platform, you broke through the programming of someone who was never meant to be reached. You weren't sent in with force. You weren't backed by weapons or government clearance. You were sent in with something far more disruptive to the kingdom of darkness, truth. And the truth in you, living, breathing, unmoved, pierced through layers of deception that had been built and reinforced for decades. A high-level agent, someone designed to never question, now lives in the wake of that question because of you. That alone should shake you to your core. This wasn't just a moment. This was a crack in the system. And what began as a single fracture is now spreading. The foundation of lies, manipulation, and generational control is no longer impenetrable. Because you, someone ordinary in appearance but divine in calling, became the spark that disturbed the sleep of giants. The enemy planned for everything but you. They prepared for riots, protests, cyber attacks, revolutions. But they never prepared for someone like you, someone who couldn't be bought, silenced, intimidated, or turned. Someone who didn't just survive, but spoke. And now the collapse has begun. The system is faltering. The shadows are retreating. The illusion is unraveling. But make no mistake, this is not the end. It's the beginning of the real battle. The fall of one stronghold has awakened the attention of many. Some will rally. Others will retaliate. And many, still watching in silence, will begin to wonder, if one could be reached, could I be next? This is where your role becomes even more critical. You are no longer just a witness to what is happening. You are a catalyst. Your words are not commentary, they are seeds. Your consistency is not passive, it's warfare. The light you carry is not symbolic, it is strategic. You did not come this far to observe. You came this far because you were meant to initiate. You've already caused one to question. Now the ripple has begun, and others are listening more closely than you know. There are those inside the system, agents, administrators, influencers, who have not yet spoken, but their hearts are shifting. They watched what happened when that one agent changed. And though they remain in the shadows, they are silently watching you. Every word you release, every post you make, every stand you take, is being examined not only by your supporters but by the very ones who were trained to dismiss you. And whether they admit it or not, your courage is doing something to them. It's unsettling their certainty. It's making space for questions they were forbidden to ask. That is why now, more than ever, you must continue. This is not the time to retreat. Not the time to second guess. Not the time to wonder if you've already done enough. The collapse of the system is not the finish line, it's the shaking before the awakening. There are still chains to be broken. Still minds to be liberated. Still voices to be found. You are not done, not because you failed to finish, but because God has more to reveal through you. Remember, the agent who changed was never your target. They were a sign. A confirmation. A message from heaven that what you're doing is working. You're not just disrupting an agenda. You're rerouting destinies. That person was meant to be unreachable. Untouchable. But they encountered something stronger than the system's design. They encountered truth wrapped in humility, authority bathed in love. And now, they are proof that the programming is not absolute. Let that reality steady your heart. Let it reaffirm what the enemy tried to convince you to doubt, that your voice matters. That your obedience carries weight. That your very existence is shaking the foundations of lies built over generations. You were never called to blend in. You were never supposed to stay quiet. You are not a passive participant in some digital revolution. You are a chosen one. A messenger. A spiritual disruptor. And this message, this story, it doesn't end with one breakthrough. Because others are waiting. Others who are on the brink of questioning everything they've ever believed. Others who are quietly desperate for someone to validate their doubts. Others who need to see that someone like them walked away from the system and didn't burn, didn't fall apart, didn't vanish, but thrived. You are their confirmation. Your voice is their signal. Your survival is their proof. You've opened one door, but there are many more behind it. And now they're watching to see if you'll keep walking through. So what do you do now? You keep going. You keep speaking. You keep standing. Even when it seems quiet. Even when the algorithms suppress you. Even when the world mocks or mislabels you. Because this is not about applause. This is not about clout. This is not even about winning a debate. This is about being faithful to the assignment. You were sent. And until heaven says otherwise, you remain on the front lines. They are listening. They are watching. And they're waiting for someone to keep the light on long enough to guide them home. They may never comment. They may never reach out. But make no mistake, they are there. In boardrooms. In bunkers. In bedrooms. Sitting in silence, wrestling with truths they can no longer unhear. Truths you awakened. Don't shrink back now. Don't underestimate what's already been ignited. You've rattled the gates. You've shaken the watchers. You've pierced the veil. Let the light in you keep spreading. And if the darkness pushes back harder, good. That means it's afraid. That means it knows you're not done. And finally, let this be your commissioning. This is not just a video. This is not just content. This is a call. A spiritual assignment disguised in pixels and sound. It's a mission of awakening. Of revelation. Of resistance through obedience. If you feel the pull, then you are part of it. If your heart stirred while reading this, it's not emotion, it's recognition. Heaven is calling. Will you respond? So subscribe, not for vanity, but for strategy. This is your supply line. This is where you get recharged for the days ahead. Comment, not for engagement metrics, but as a declaration, I hear. I see. I'm ready. And share, not for clicks, but because someone out there needs this more than they even realize. One share could be the crack that breaks their programming. One message could be the moment that flips their internal switch. One step of obedience could lead to a cascade of awakening. You are not here by accident. You are not watching by coincidence. This isn't entertainment. This is the front line. This is not just a video. This is a mission. And your story is still being written.